let's go ahead and kick off, and I'll introduce myself and then hand off to Mark, who will introduce himself, and we'll talk through some of our concepts around next generation of privilege and how this is impacted within a broader identity security context. Things to look out for, the problems of tomorrow, what we're seeing out in the market from a, kind of taking a holistic view at how can we prepare ourselves and make this more, make privilege management more efficient moving forward with our expanding landscape. So my name is Chris Heron. I'm Director of Product Management here at Saviynt. I've been in cybersecurity, identity security, and privileged access for more than the last decade, primarily managing products. But I've also spent some time implementing and testing products as well. So had a lot of fun in my background, seen a lot of different PAM and identity security governance problems. So going to be very excited to share some of that experience with you today as we talk through what this is all going to look like in the future. And Mark, let's go ahead and hand off to you.
Thanks, Chris. Mark Phelan, I lead the PAM practice at IC Consult. IC Consult is an IAM only professional services firm with just under 1,000 practitioners globally, and I focus on our PAM practice. So looking forward to our conversation and talking through some of the problems and issues we see customers dealing with.
Sounds great. Awesome. Then we'll go ahead and kick off right with you. Are you ready to go?
Let's go.
Perfect. All right. Oh yeah, just a reminder, these some housekeeping apologies. And I realize there's actually a presenter slide. This is what I always end up doing. I always end up racing ahead to the next slide. But just a quick reminder, you are automatically muted for this. All of this will be recorded and provided out to you and everyone that registered for this. And we will have time for some question and answer here at the end. So just some pictures of us, even though you can see us. Here I am on the left, and of course, Mark here on the right. All right, then actually I will go ahead and be kicking us off here, it looks like, Mark. So let me go ahead and move into, let's talk a little bit about what privileged access looks like from Savient's perspective, from a broader identity security perspective, and what are we seeing here today. So let's start off with a broad topic, Mark. I'm going to talk through some ideas, and then I'd love to get your feedback, what you've seen on your side. So when we start thinking about what is privileged access, this is something that I've seen over the last 5 years change heavily, and we all know about, I think if you've been in market, you've been hearing a lot about non-human identities, AI agents, MCP servers, all of these different new interactions and how privilege fits within this context. But the concept of privilege overall, let's just kind of get up to that top level problem that we're really trying to address in the market, is that privilege has changed altogether. How we compensate for the risk of privilege, what we consider privileged, as new compliance mandates and cybersecurity attacks make us now think about business users extracting PII data, finance users accessing privileged finance data. And so the larger issue that we're seeing kind of out in the broader market is that PAM focused practices can be very siloed. They're very siloed in terms of experience as well. And what we're seeing is more of a demand for and more problems around this broader downstream effect of privilege. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say where maybe 10 years ago, the concept of PAM was really focused around what could bring down your enterprise from an infrastructure perspective, to the more recent where now it's expanded to be business users and applications, a real focus on the non-human accounts. And what I'm seeing a big expansion in lately is PAM programs sort of now focusing on that cloud piece as well, and not just the infrastructure. So I would say the privilege scope creep, or the privilege creep, is strong. And as we sort of realize what is important to an enterprise, we start to realize more and more access really sort of falls into that bucket. And as accounts and users get more and more access to all the different pieces they need, it just becomes a lot more prevalent.
Yeah,
strategy.
That's definitely what I've seen as well. And I think with that, as something that comes to mind for everyone to think about as we're walking through this, and kind of what that next generation of PAM, or I'm going to call it PAM.next, since I've been maybe in product management too long, but what PAM.next needs to look like. Traditionally, we've been used to interacting with the privileged human user, the DevOps user, the DevSecOps. I'm interacting either via, API frameworks, maybe API tool sets. It could be a CLI tool set. It could be a CI/CD. Or if we're talking privileged human user, I'm used to using native tool sets, usually more of a technical tool set, obviously, that I'm interacting with. Those are different interaction points for privilege than we're going to be dealing with for especially these business users. So as we think about expanding this, one of the primary problems that we will talk about here as well, and that you need to be thinking about, is how do we enable this downstream effect to be an efficiency driver rather than what PAM has traditionally been seen as, which is a disruption, a potential disruption, but a risk, but a requirement for risk reduction. And so, as we broaden this, we need to be thinking about identity security in the context of efficiency. Any last
Absolutely.
notes on this, Mark?
Yeah, I think you touched on what I consider sort of the biggest piece is most of the enterprises I see the adoption piece is one of the bigger pain points that they're dealing with, and sort of really turning the story around from being seen as a disruptor, like you mentioned, that is enforcing a control, to being seen as a enabler that is helping the other business units fulfill their compliance needs for those controls. I think is a huge tide I'm seeing change with how the PAM programs want to be presented in their enterprise.
Yep, perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the question to be asked when you are looking at adopting a PAM solution is, what is that? What are those interaction points? What does that look like? And can those meet a broader range of users where they're used to interacting with access? Kind of moving forward, just talking about what we've seen in terms of criticality. And this next slide, I don't think we'll spend much time on, but I always like to make sure to outline, for those of you who might not be as mature in PAM, or have not seen all the just how critical a locking down privilege is for these organizations. This is still the primary source of compromise across an organization. And what we're seeing as we're talking about business users is now you're seeing that these, even unsophisticated phishing attacks against business users, such as, even someone as maybe in the middle, such as myself, who's on the product management team, but even down to the finance and sales teams, they can extract essential data. They can extract PII, they can extract financial data. They can still make significant issues for an organization from a compliance and risk mandate, a fine perspective. So even as we're looking at these numbers, which primarily focus around the traditional privileged access user, this problem becomes exponential. All of these problems become exponential as we are scaling this downstream. So thinking about the data breaches involving privileged access misuse, as privilege expands and as we change what compliance requirements, regulatory requirements, and just risk mitigation strategies we need downstream, that's going to increase. The problem of visibility is now going to be one of data overload. Show me what I need to see intelligently, and don't just spit out reports. I'm going to have too much under management. In fact, most PAM practices are already at that point where they're not removing privilege from the landscape. They're really just managing it. And so as this scales, that's going to be a major problem if we're not looking at how do we remove some of that operational complexity and standing accounts, standing privilege that I need to manage as it exists. And so just some things to call out, that these are the problems of today. These are the problems that we've seen for the last decade and longer. These are the problems that PAM was initially created to solve, and more identity security is now focused on. But the issue here to really think about, and I'm going to pass to Mark, is what are you seeing? Or actually, my question, Mark, will be what are you seeing on your side from the market and from your experience kind of how these might be changed by this shift towards AI agents and MCP interactions. Just what are your thoughts on that as it pertains to cyber insurance requirements, compliance mandates? I think everyone can get my sense of where I'm thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think originally PAM was seen as a way to uh, find a reduce the haystack, right? As you're hunting for the needle, and as we sort of locked down the privilege, that haystack became manageable, and it was easier to find the needle. But now, as we go back to expanding the concept of privilege, now just the privilege haystack is back to being a haystack, and so with AI agents sort of proliferating across enterprises, that haystack is growing bigger and bigger. So we sort of, to be honest, have to do the same thing, right? And leverage, go back to sort of, okay, well, now even amongst the privilege world, we need to figure out what matters the most to us, and continue sort of sifting through. So I think the scale has just has increased so much that it requires sort of a shift in how we think about it. And in particular, like you said, certifications and that access piece, it's not just about protecting the privilege. Now it's about reducing that footprint and getting it back to where we can truly sort of tighten our hands around it and lock it down.
Yeah, I think that's the big part about on this on the right side. And this is I'm a champion just generally in the market about this concept. When we think about what the a large problem that the PAM market is solving for, and that certainly I'm focused on solving for, we're focused on solving for, is the in the future, we're not going to have an exponential amount more of human resources to tackle these problems. And I think we all know that. Technology accounts, the problem is manifesting exponentially fast. And we were never going to have enough human resources to manage this as it is regardless. And now with technology changes, this becomes a much shorter timeline. And so the necessity to decrease complexity where you can, decrease the noise where you can, and then the requirement to have more baked in intelligence for your vision around this. It's not just a discovery report anymore. That's not going to be sufficient. Show me intelligently what I need to onboard. Show me intelligent what is most risky for me so that I can apply the right policies to it. I'm not going to be able to scale that in a static system anymore. So the reality of managing intelligent agents, the reality of managing MCP interactions, and all these thousands of things is that those same things are going to need to help us solve that problem. And so as we're looking at that right side, the focus, really what I've seen in market, and certainly what we're seeing, what we've made certainly great use of is baking in this new technology as part of the journey, so that it's so that we're seeing the same benefits, obviously. And I think that's obvious to everyone, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, a few challenges with kind of that I've alluded to in traditional solutions, and just not just traditional solutions, but traditional practices, kind of from a holistic point of view, that I've seen in the market. So the growing identity complexity, we've hit on that a lot. But one of the biggest problems that I've seen in the market today is that most PAM practices are tracking account access primarily, and they're not really tracking everything back to the primary identity level focus, and driving that attribution and ownership and full life cycle of not just the account but the identity above it. And so the growing complexity of accounts and secrets, uh, that only compounds this problem, as you don't have there's not simple ways outside of in many solutions very point integrations for relating this information back to each other. And that falls into the next category, which is a big problem, which is I see the biggest problem I see in PAM practices today is they have a great RFP, a great feature list of what they want to do, but where they get stuck is they end up vaulting credentials, and they end up doing check out, check in. Maybe they do some privileged sessions. Not maybe the vast majority, but a significant portion of the market that I've seen out there that have adopted solutions for the last decade are having issues extending PAM beyond that initial that initial implementation focus. So there's just a lack of interoperability within the PAM market for extension frameworks to make this far simpler. So as you're adopting, say, as you're already making connections via certain tool sets, maybe it's your ServiceNow, or maybe it's your governance solution, maybe it's Saviynt governance, and you're making those connections. How can we turn on function rather than require full redeployment, as PAM typically does? Because this ends up being difficult and brittle as you upgrade environments, as you deal with new operating systems and new cloud providers. The integration point is really where I see a lot of breakages. I'm going to pause right here, and Mark, I'd love to get your thoughts on from an integration perspective, kind of what have you seen as not just from a customer experience perspective necessarily for onboarding, but what are there any new integration points that you've been seeing as well that have been flaring up this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the biggest areas is like you said, the governance integration. And what I see a lot of the concern around these AI agents and the non-human identities is around sort of like knowing what's going on with them. And there seems to be this concern that now it breaks the overall paradigm. But the reality is, no, it all boils back down to the identity concept and the concept of someone owns this account. If no one owns the account, then it shouldn't exist in your environment. And you need to have that traceability and that insight. And so I would say the biggest struggle most of my clients are dealing with is the discovery of what the accounts are, where they are, who owns them, and what they're doing. And all that is metadata and information that your governance tool should be maintaining and tracking ongoing. So to do that discovery effort and not have it feed into a governance tool is sort of can result in redundant efforts. And so really sort of leveraging that to feed the governance aspect and be able to align those accounts and what you're managing to an identity who is owning it, making decisions, deciding if it should exist or not, right? Changing the paradigm from this exists, we're going to control it, to do we even need that? Is a big part of it. So what we see, not just the ability to provision access to the PAM tool being a key core component of governance, not just the ability to request like to do certifications or get access to the PAM tool or to endpoints, but also the ability to provide the usage information to the certification and the certifier so that you're not rubber stamping, or provide the ability to onboard in a more automated fashion. So if you're requesting privilege to another endpoint, one of the biggest requests we've seen this year is custom workflows leveraging API commands to automatically vault credentials when they receive the privilege. So that way it's not a separate process or a separate email. You're building that out into the flow of that account request and the granting of the privilege from the get-go. So those are kinds of integrations that make the solution and the controls more robust and really make it so you're reducing that overhead and that business as usual, and you're making it so the system is working for you and sort of in running
Perfect.
effectively.
Yeah, just a few quick points on that, and I am going to get through some of the content after this a little quickly, because I'd really like to get toward the content at the end. But 2 points that you made that I really wanted to highlight. I had to quickly type this over here before I forgot. A big portion, something that I see so often, especially if you go and walk into, when we go and walk into many of our prospects and out there in the market, is when you go and connect into these applications and cloud providers and targets, and you go actually pull the list of, hey, here are your orphan accounts, here are all your accounts that you don't have an ownership for, and these are potentially shared accounts that are used by 20 users that are that have access to, goodness, let's say 80 admin within 80 UC. What you'll find is you might find 50, 100 of these orphaned accounts with no ownership, with no tracking, and just identifying that alone is really a critical component, a critical moment that I've seen when talking to customers. And the second portion, when we start talking about certification, recertification, and all of this, this really highlights the importance of pushing towards a just-in-time approach. I'm a big proponent of just-in-time, true zero-standing privilege will necessitate very little certification or more intelligent certification, but also baking in intelligence frameworks into certification so that you don't do that rubber stamping. So just a few quick notes here on the right, and I'm going to get through a little bit of content quickly, like I mentioned. With all of this, what you've seen is obviously escalating costs. With every integration point and every complex integration, you need more human resources to manage that, or you're going to need now an AI tool or a AI integration tool to manage that. That's another vendor relationship. That's another cost. That's another thing to manage. And so you've just seen a blow up of escalating costs as I've had pointed solutions for all of these problems. And the last slide, just a review. So privileged access, really want you to take this away. Apologies, one click too many. Really want you to take this away that we need to quit thinking about privileged and privileged use, privileged access management, and identity security as it relates to it in the context of my privileged user. We really need to think about privilege in terms of risk reduction. So is the interaction that is taking place privileged? And we need to control privileged interactions, privileged orchestration, privileged tasks, and not protecting just the privileged account. It needs to be protecting at the point of intent rather than the point of source. All right. Mark, I'll bring you in here in a few. I want to get through some product overview slides just to talk a little bit about our product and how it relates to this, but I'd like to spend a good bit of time on the last section. So mind if I breeze through some of this?
Go for it.
Awesome. So just quick product overview, just to understand kind of how we here at Saviynt, we address these problems, and we think customers should be addressing these problems. Let's say that, because not all customers are at this level of PAM maturity. But the first portion that we always need to think about, I mentioned it earlier, is the discovery. What does that look like? What does that process look like? And what is the scope of what I can really see? Am I discovering and onboarding just privileged accounts and and potentially endpoints, so that kind of that more traditional PAM experience? Well, within the context of all of the problems that I've talked about, broader discovery and more deep discovery within not just infrastructure, but applications, databases, cloud providers, within everything really is necessary, because privilege, like we mentioned just a moment ago, it's not an account, it's not a source, it's a task, it's an event, it's a interaction point. And so in order to really holistically to look at this, we need deep discovery within the infrastructure, the applications, the databases, and using pre-existing connections to pull data down to the entitlement level, and really provide that more holistic view as we onboard everything into the what I'll call the privileged landscape more so. We also need to make sure we're managing for the broad range of identities. I'll talk a bit more about that, but very quickly. But just thinking also third parties, remote privileged access, making sure that we're not just thinking about our managed individuals and managed devices, but what happens in an unmanaged context? How are you accounting for that identity life cycle, and how are you onboarding and especially offboarding those identities from how you're from your PAM practice? All right, and then once we've identified, obviously, it's really great that that we find all this information. So let's say we found out that Chris Heron has access to this entitlement through this shared account to this application and this infrastructure target. I want to remediate that. I want to take that away and apply new policy to it. And so being able to do so all, once again, through one simple workflow, all in one user experience, one administrative and user experience. So now as a user, yes, you've made my life slightly harder. You've taken away some standing access. No user is going to be happy about that. We all know that. The really essential portion there is then how do I gain that access when I need it? And so making sure that I'm shown very easily exactly what I need access to, that I can request it easily, and doing this, like I mentioned, all in one place. So just one simple searchable area. So these are tackling some of the problems of, obviously removing privilege from your landscape. So not even having accounts that exist with privilege, or not having privilege assigned to those accounts until they need it. So let's talk about first removing that privilege, but then we really talked a lot about enabling, making a more efficient PAM practice, because as we scale these practices, this is going to be essential, is how do we enable users to do this very easily? So obviously, just thinking holistically, how do we begin to remove that risk while still enabling risky access? And then thinking broadly, more holistically, within identity security context. And this is something that, as a somebody who comes from a background more specifically in PAM historically, and now I've spent the last few years with Saviynt coming, really driving towards a more broader identity security picture. There's a whole lot more that goes into a strong PAM practice than implementing a PAM tool. And a lot of that is going to be the underlying intelligence and data that you're able to extract from this. So what am I able to actually, what valuable insights can you provide for me, and what automation can you provide on top of that? And so having built-in a built-in intelligence layer across not just PAM, but across governance, across really all of these different identity layers, is going to be essential to easily surface um, critical information so that I can take action on it. All right, we've gotten to PAM.next. This is where I think we can continue more of the fun conversation. And I do have a an eye on the time. So in about 10-15 minutes, we will move to question and answers. All right. So Mark, something I always like to talk about, um, you know, so we've talked about the problem in the market today. We've talked about some of the capabilities that our product provides, and how it relates to that. But where we really need to start when we talk about this, and I'd love to hear where you're seeing customers start, is where is every customer at in their journey here? Because what I've seen, and you mentioned it earlier, is a lack of adoption, a lack of implementation. Basically, hey, we want to do just-in-time access, so let's start there, but the organization maybe was a little bit further down in containment, and so what you've seen is just a rough shot in deployment. So many times it's I think it's largely on us as trusted advisors to provide that guidance in product to help people. But where are you seeing customers get hung up these days?
Yeah, so where I see most customers sort of hit a roadblock or struggle is around the discovery and understanding, right? As we talk about the PAM, what is privilege expanding? So is the concern around, okay, well, what am I missing? What do I need to expand our current PAM controls to, now that now that cloud is under my umbrella, or now that we're doing a shift from on-prem to the cloud? We need to have new paradigms, or control these new assets, right? The number of assets in each enterprise is increasing so dramatically, whether it's applications, hardware, middleware. It's just it becomes overwhelming, and that's part of what I think one of the big benefits of having a PAM tool integrated with your IGA solution is IGA is already, your governance is already trying to look for those credentials and those accounts. So hooking right in the PAM tool provides a good way to mature your IGA solution while also maturing your PAM solution, and then allows you to sort of leapfrog that discovery hurdle and sort of focus on some of these more mature aspects and get back to shrinking the risk plane, right? And get to the just-in-time access and some actual maturity growth versus just sort of expanding the footprint and what you have under control.
Yeah, definitely. And apologies, everyone. I've been rubbing my eyes. I have two toddlers at home, and they always disrupt my sleep somehow. So today I've got some itchy eyes, but that's all right. So it's good that you say that, because as I've seen this. Oh goodness, I'm about to sneeze. We're going to see this in a few seconds. This is going to be something that'll come up in a couple sentences. So what I've seen with kind of in the last decade, as really primarily, I've seen kind of the IGA implementation all the way over here in this silo with this leader with these priorities, and I've seen the PAM deployment over here, the same thing, and they really haven't talked to each other until a year, 18 months into the deployment. And now we're going to talk about how do we integrate and what it supports. And so we're very reactive, or it has been reactive as a market, and what you end up with is a disjointed experience as you move along the maturity curve. So I'm going to implement governance here, but then at the same time, I'm trying to implement something in PAM back here, before it even potentially. And so what I'm doing is losing efficiency as I deploy capabilities, and instead of activating use cases, activating intent and tasks, and turning that on holistically, what I see is people get stuck because I have to deploy my PAM solution to get containment, and then I'm going to go over here and deploy my IGA solution to get governance, and then down here I'm going to deploy the integration to get because I have to get the integration here. And now what I've found is this is just too long, too far, and I've reduced risk enough. And so, certainly our philosophy at Saviynt, and with the convergence, I know that term has been used quite a lot. I think maybe we'll need to do a brainstorm as a market to find a new one. But the convergence of all of these solutions and visibility and workflows, what it enables is for us to come into an organization and say, hey, where are you ready for organizationally from an intent perspective? Are you ready for just-in-time access and you're stuck at containment? Because that's where we can begin, because of this converged value that we can get by implementing both with each other rather than as in opposition to each other. So I definitely have seen the same thing. All right. So how do we here at Saviynt impact some of this? I just talked about some of our philosophy, but how do we actually enable you to move along this curve? What are the things that our current PAM customers or our current PAM partners need to be leveraging within the solution and beginning to drive within their PAM practices? The first is going to be really focusing on baking intelligence into your broad identity security practice. So, obviously we've been talking a lot about privilege and a lot about PAM, but as I mentioned earlier, PAM is moving downstream. PAM is broadening. As we think about that, this becomes more essential holistically across all identities. So, making sure that you are baking in intelligence so that you can scale these your governance and privilege framework, because you'll need a good framework as the business expands. And so, having that layer dynamically built in, making sure that everything is in one place so that risk is going to be managed holistically and not pointed at different problems. Mark, have you seen? I'd be curious to hear if what you've seen in terms of maybe if you've seen any really neat intelligence-based use cases, or where you see the market going. Like, where do you see the next area for intelligence to be useful? At this point, we've seen obviously a lot on the risk reduction side, like, should this user have access through certification? What are some recommendations as this user is onboarded to policy and permissions? But have you seen anything more dynamic moving forward?
So I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're asking, but one of the things that I thought was really interesting is leveraging PAM data and information for other business units, right? I'm seeing a lot. We talked a little bit about the PAM, like in the IAM program, wanting to be seen as a provider to the other services versus a control point. And one of the things I've had asked at several clients is the SOC team wanting the ability to pause access and the ability to not just kill someone's current access, but either cut someone out of a current session or just terminate their access temporarily for like an hour or 2 hours while they do some investigation. And that to me goes to that being dynamic, being agile, connecting the different halves or silos in your enterprise together so that they can benefit from the information or capabilities of the other areas. And it's something that is possible. It's something that improves the workflow of that team and detectability, and especially for financial services enterprises where the difference of an hour can mean the difference of significant loss. That's been a very interesting use case that I've been excited to build out at a few clients.
That's actually exactly what I was really asking. I've actually heard something similar, which is, what does my auditor experience need to look like? Like, how do I scale that experience? Not just, how do I provide audit details to different silos, and how do I present exactly the information that this compliance persona is going to care about versus this audit persona, and how do I make this whole process intelligent? And so baking some of this in terms of, let's say instead of needing to pull this data, kind of in a static way to provide to the SOC team, asking the system, hey, I have a SOC team report. This is what they're looking for. Can you provide just this information for me and export this for them? Building in, like I mentioned, intelligence into these workflows is really where I've seen a lot of customers just feeling that pain. So yeah, I think that's exactly what I was asking, and that kind of feeds into the dynamic story, which is what PAM and privilege needs to be moving forward. Which is okay, so we're getting all of this data, like we were just saying, we can provide a lot of data to the SOC team. Well, how does that inform on policy dynamically afterwards? If the SOC team identifies something, or not just the SOC team, if any team, let's say any security or compliance team has a new requirement, can that be, how quickly can that go from ideation to application of policy? And can that be changed intelligently as the frameworks change? Organizations are going to need to think about baking this type of dynamic policy within a broader identity security framework. So thinking about how your endpoint agents and your PAM solution and your governance and your ITSM and everything will need to have this type of interconnectivity to do this policy orchestration um, at the speed that we're going to be seeing it with all of the. I'm bleeding into my next story with all of the agentic AI and MCP and there's other things other than MCP, obviously, workflows that we're going to see. All of this really just speaks to the problem that we're going to deal with is one of scale. The problem we're going to deal with is one of data. And where we support that is by being that one-stop holistic place for all identity security context, and having a converged platform to bake all of this into one experience. So I'm not needing to break integration points. I'm not needing to extract data. The system is doing all of this for me. So Mark, kind of to your point, the need for that type of efficiency, even on the audit side, is going to be more and more paramount just due to the scale problem. So I'm glad you brought that up. All right, perfect. And just one last quick slide. So something for everyone to take away, just as we think about the access points, the start off points for our customers, we need to rethink, like I mentioned earlier, the access point. Where do users need to begin their interaction points for PAM? And so currently today, if I'm accessing an SSH endpoint, I'm accessing an application endpoint, as a user, typically, I need to know where I'm going, I need to know what I'm doing, and I'm going to go perform a task. There's some automation I can bake in there, but really, as a user, I need to know what and where I'm going, what access level I need. But as we scale this and we really looked at risk mitigation, the access point is going to need to be more and more natural language focused. It's going to be more and more accessible to all users, even down to the customer level, as we apply these policies down. And that's certainly where we see things driving, where we're driving the conversation. All right, I'm actually going to go ahead and go quickly to the thank you slide instead, so we have some time for question and answers. So thank you everyone for joining. I know we spent a long time talking through the current problems of today and just things that you should be thinking about, why visibility is so critical, and why point solutions are no longer really going to be effective as this problem scales. And then we talked a little bit about, in the future, and how Saviynt currently sees these problems and addresses these problems. But we do have some time for questions. And Mark, if you have any closing statements.
No, appreciate the time to talk PAM. It's an exciting area. Definitely one of the growing areas in cybersecurity, as people realize, the proactivity of that has more return than some of the reactivity of sort of the historical cyber efforts. So it's exciting.
Absolutely. Well, especially when you think about what are we really trying to do here? Are we trying to cover ourselves after the fact, or are we trying to mitigate risk? Where I think a lot of customers get stuck is I've identified and governed access, but what I haven't done is actually reduced my risk. And what we need to be able to do as a market and certainly us as a company, and what we do is how do we enable customers to overcome the hurdle and begin to mitigate risk without that significant disruption like we were talking about. All right,
Absolutely.
some questions if we have any. I do not have the chat or anything. I only have the presentation available to me. If anyone on the line can help me with that. That's all right if we don't have any questions.
Yeah.
Mark, we're just very clear presenters. So
Yep. It's nice being perfect.
I'll let you know once I make a mistake, and then yeah, happened earlier today. There we go. All right. Well, if that's it. If we don't have any questions, then I think that's our presentation today, and we really appreciate the time that you've taken to talk with us about PAM problems, the PAM market, privilege overall, and identity security. What to think about moving forward, and what a modern platform looks like.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Great chatting with you, Chris.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to end my slideshow and stop sharing. All right.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.